Morena, and welcome to the Dawn Chorus for Tuesday, the 29th of October. I'm Bernard Hickey for the Kaka. This is my daily podcast and email and video about Aotearoa's political economy and, in particular, what's happening with housing, climate and poverty reduction. You'll know that one of my key things to talk about in recent years has been the exodus of New Zealand residents, people mostly born here, to live permanently in Australia and elsewhere. In my view, this is because the costs of living are so high in New Zealand relative to incomes. Incomes are relatively low compared to other places we can easily go, and even places that we can't so easily go. And this long-running and widening gap between incomes and the costs of living here versus other places is coming to a head. We see that every month in the migration statistics, but it's worth having a look at again, in particular because the papers in the Stuff group, which includes the Sunday Star Times, the Press and the Post, have focused in recent days, particularly over the long weekend, on this exodus of New Zealanders leaving to live overseas. And we know the story. Over the years, tens of thousands of New Zealanders have left. And in the last 6 months or so, that exodus has risen to record high levels, to the point where we're now looking at about 200 people a day leaving to go and live in Australia, and it's almost double that for the world overall, because people aren't just going to Australia, they're going to Europe, the UK, the US, and other places. And it begs the question, how's this going to end? What's going to change the underlying political economy situation so that the exodus stops? Or will we just run out of people? Well, we know that's not happening. In fact, we still have net migration overall as we replace the people leaving with often temporary, lower paid migrants. And that's effectively part of the economic model we're running at the moment, which is based on orienting our economy and our personal finances to take advantage of leveraged tax-free capital gains on residential property. Remembering that, of course, we're the only country in the world, at least developed country in the world, that does not have a capital gains tax, that does not have an estate tax or some sort of estate duty, and also doesn't have a central land tax or stamp duty. In Australia, for example, there is a capital gains tax, although it is not at the full levels. And there are stamp duties and land taxes at state levels. All this means that Australia doesn't have a huge hole in its tax system, and that has allowed it to do a bunch of things, including to have state governments and central governments invest heavily in public infrastructure, including public transport, education, health, in ways that mean that Australia has real wages about 30% higher than Aotearoa's, and in large parts of its economy has the scale and the productivity to ensure that living costs are lower, including in housing. And the best example of that is in Melbourne, where because of their extensive public transport network and their ability at a state level to fund infrastructure to help with house building, house costs, or at least rental costs, have been falling in recent months, and in particular versus the rest of the country, in large part because it's been able to increase its housing supply significantly. The reason I'm focusing on this a little bit is I've just come back from a couple of weeks in Melbourne, and I have 3 brothers and 2 sisters-in-laws and 5 nephews and nieces who have all who are all now living in Melbourne. And I was in Melbourne, of course, because my mum had moved there with my dad 15 years ago to ensure that they could be there with my brothers and their wives and those kids as they were growing up. It's been a constant point of family life for me, at least, and I suspect for many other people in New Zealand, that their nephews and nieces and grandkids are growing up offshore. Now, you may wonder, well, isn't this normal? Isn't this what happens in every country? No. New Zealand's level of expats, so the share of the population who now live permanently overseas, is the second or the third highest in the world, depending on which data set you use and how recent it is. And it's been that way for a decade, and it's worsening again. So a decade or so ago, the winner of the largest share of expats living overseas was Ireland. That has changed in recent years as their economy has improved and many people have gone home, or more importantly, not left. And we're looking now at the likes of Estonia and Portugal as those countries who have slightly worse expat rates than we do. And the question I wanted to put to everyone today is, how is this going to end? We know the problem. We have a huge hole in our tax system, which means that we don't invest in our public infrastructure, in our businesses. We have very low savings rates, very low investment rates in anything other than leveraged residential property. We're shocked to see that the costs of our housing, both to rent and to own, are incredibly high relative to our incomes and relative to those people living overseas, because we don't allow enough houses to be built and because we've turned housing into an investment class, which is preferenced over investment in real assets. And this hole in our tax system, which opened up in 1989 when the tax reforms were about to fill in the gap by including a capital gains tax, did not, because the government of the day, the then Labor government, wasn't popular. And the removal of tax incentives for savings and other types of pension schemes has created this gap, along with the increasingly mortgage-based nature of our banking system, and at various points the leveraging up of bank balance sheets, but also household balance sheets to the housing market. Now, all of this begs the question, what are the people who actually own the homes and who have their own children who are moving overseas? What do they think? How do they feel about not being able to watch their grandkids grow up? Because that's the inevitable result of refusing to allow this hole in the tax system to be closed. And I suggest that this is the final penny to drop in this debate about the exodus of our young. When are the owners of residential land, who make up the small cohort of median voters who decide elections, when are they going to change their minds about refusing to allow either a capital gains tax or some sort of wealth tax to even up this playing field and remove that hole in our tax system? At the moment, it's not clear to those people that their refusal to allow both the building of housing and the taxation of capital gains on residential land is the reason why they're losing their grandkids overseas. And you do have to wonder, when are those people who are leaving going to say to their parents and grandparents, your refusal to change the system is forcing me to bring up your grandkids and great-grandkids overseas? I'm Bernard Hickey. That was a Dawn Chorus for Tuesday the 29th of October. Ka kite anō.